MAPECU3 Configuration Part 2. In Part 1 we discussed the general screen. In Part 2 we're going to talk about the TPS and nitrous screens. So by clicking the TPS screen you'll see two parameters and a small table. The TPS idle value is the minimum value where TPS input sensor is set for idle. Now there's a trick for setting this. If you've wired up the brown TPS input wire, you can use the I key to set this. So in this case I've got TPS actually wide open at the moment. So if I hit sample it with the I key, you'll see it's at actually saying maximum. So if I wind the TPS input down to minimum, hit the I key, and you'll see it's now sampled at 498. If I go to the maximum value, I can adjust TPS, press the I key and sample it. So that's it, it's sampled, minimum and maximum. Obviously you should do that with the ignition on but engine not running as advised, but it's a simple way to set up the max and min values for TPS sensor. The next little table is TPS and map enrichment. There's 10 columns, and the columns are set by the maximum RPM value on the general screen. In this case we've got 6000 RPM as maximum, so it's divided the 10 columns evenly. You enter a percentage into these zones, and the MAPECU3 calculates a value of fuel enrichment based on the speed that the TPS pedal or sensor moves in a positive manner. So if you punch the throttle position very quickly, it'll calculate that you've pressed it very quickly. It may be a core 100% value, which is then multiplied by the value in this table, 50%, which will then relate to a 50% fuel enrichment, which is actually quite a bit. So you've just got to be careful you don't actually enter too much. The map enrichment line is similar, but it's a positive pressure change. So for example, vacuum or high vacuum to 0 psi, which is typical when you crack open the throttle and the plenum fills with air, it sees a positive change that will calculate a positive map enrichment value, which is then multiplied by the value calculated from this table. So you'll see in this example TPS is set to 50% at 600 and 1200, and then it will interpolate from 1200 to 1800 in a linear fashion from 50% down to 0%. So the midway point it would be at 25%, for example. Same with map percentage. Now the overall application of enrichment is governed by the maximum value. So the MAPECU3 calculates TPS enrichment, calculates map enrichment every so many milliseconds, and then it works out whichever is the greatest, and that's applied to the fuel output. So hopefully that clears up what the map and TPS enrichment values are. The next tab is NOS activation. With the MAPECU3 we have a very advanced NOS activation function. NOS channel 1 has a RPM window, minimum maximum, a minimum throttle position, a minimum pressure, maximum pressure window, so a pressure window, and a minimum speed. So this function is useful for enabling NOS once you've moved off the line in your racing configuration, so to maximise that punch of nitrous and perhaps before your big turbo comes on screen. So in this case we've got minimum speed set to 0, which means it's disabled, so we've disabled the speed input. But what you could potentially do is set minimum speed to be just above the speed where the launch control function, for example, disengages and then nitrous kicks in. The whole idea of the minimum speed function is so that you're not applying nitrous the moment you hit the fuel to take off from the standstill. You've got some rolling motion, and you're not going to just light up the tyres with nitrous. NOS activation 2 is a very simple function where it's just got an RPM window and a throttle position window.